I'm going to try to hurry on this because we have a video show that we want people able to see, and we're going to try to get this set up. The library closes at 5, and we're closing in on, losing that. We're going to see. But before you stands a Dewey dad, remembering the son he almost had. Circumstances over the last year dramatically reduced the amount of time I was able to spend with Alex. I spent a lot of time since his death attempting to reconstruct what happened in his life during that last year and before. What follows is a revealed truth about a loss which amplifies Dunn's explanation. It tolls keener for thee than for me. To the probable surprise of many here today, late in his life, Alex wrote, "I never felt like I belonged anywhere except Dewey, if that counts." This statement demands that we learn of Dewey to better understand why he might have said this and what changed in him while there. Dewey is the residents and their family's shorthand term for the John Dewey Academy, a school, as the founder sometimes said, for bright fuck-ups. It is often classified as a therapeutic boarding school to simplify explanation. However, like many simplifications, that misleads. The school is intended to serve as a subset of those kids who are typically enrolled in therapeutic boarding schools, but operates under a unique protocol that is both high risk and high reward. Pardon me? Okay. While all who spend even a few months there benefit, most who enroll do not graduate. Those who do succeed become exceptional moral leaders with self-esteem based on a solid sense of academic and psychological accomplishment. Alex, we were told by the school founder, was among the greatest students of all time. This from a man with only weeks of his own death and famously disinclined to pass out unearned accolades. This opinion was supported by comments by his cohorts and faculty at the school. Additional evidence of his transformation can be observed in the effects he had on several individuals in the weeks before his death, one or more of whom are in attendance today. This brings us to a point where we can appreciate what Dewey meant to him. To paraphrase the title of Paul Gauguin's greatest masterpiece, what took him to Dewey, what did he do there, and where was he going? Getting to Dewey. Living in Shoreline, known as Mac to most, Mac Doug to a few, and Alex to his family, he aspired to become independent of his parents, stealing food and used clothing, and spending as much time as possible at friends' homes. Mac was his grandfather's nickname all through high school, and like his grandfather, he was becoming a high school dropout, very bright but afflicted, not by entitlement, but in confidence in his worth. His primary sources of self-esteem seemed to arise from his snow sports expertise and talent and his few young years as a commercial fisherman. He was arrested for attempted breaking and entering in middle school and given a diverted sentence if he stayed out of trouble until he was 18. Within a couple of years, while facing severe consequences if caught, he began lightweight drug dealing. With the money he accumulated, he later admitted he thought he might move to Oregon and change his identity. As things evolved, this remained his plan, sort of. However, he also admitted that drug dealing was intended mostly to compensate for his professed difficulties in establishing relationships. And all that time, he accumulated a net profit of only $400. But he had become a legendary source of the best stuff at the best price. By the middle of his junior year, he had fallen a year behind in school credits and held a 1.5 cumulative GPA. On a Friday in early March 2009, he went to school with a commercial quantity of marijuana and a scale in his backpack, intending to sell some at a party somewhere after school that day. However, he was also drunk on a bottle of codeine cough syrup, which got him a trip to the office. Fortunately for him, the campus security officer was not sent. A staffer decided to retrieve him from the classroom, and as he was being taken to the office, he recognized the catastrophe that would befall him if the pack was examined, so he ran off campus. If the escort had been the security officer, he would have been pursued off campus for resisting arrest. He was merely expelled. He entered a wilderness program in southern Utah on my birthday a few days later. 8 weeks later, he entered the John Dewey Academy in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. I'm going to interrupt myself here and say that 99% of the credit for that move is his mother's. When asked during his admission interview at Dewey what he thought he might do after graduation, he said he might go to Kosrae for diver certification. He clearly had no sense of his potential. While this interview was less than winning, Tom Bradder, the school's founder, recognized that his lack of self-appreciation could be a hindrance to success, but should not be a barrier to admission. All the Dewey graduates are above average, but they don't arrive that way. They arrive with a unique combination of assets and issues, and the issues have overwhelmed. While he was a perfect Dewey candidate, he was not the typical Dewey student. His had not been a life of entitlement or shepherding by helicopter parenting. In fact, he insisted on a life of subsistence, resorting to a petty theft to feed a fantasy of economic independence and personal autonomy. Alex drew and painted. He was an artist. We know it because within and among his writings he embedded glimpses of what he observed, inferred, and invented. He preferred watercolor or ink, as did his great-grandfather. Later he became a writer. He wrote reactions and refactions and reflections on all manner of things. He wrote about solitude and from solitude and in solitude, sentence after sentence, completely composed, flowing perfectly formed from his fountain pen in tiny script into his Moleskine. Thank God he was a writer, because he left a large corpus of perspectives on people and relationships, on events and objects, and on ideas. In these I found him. Doing Dewey. His first challenge was to get real, and the first step on that path was to drop Mac and become Alex. He began with a very high aspiration for a rapid promotion and to impress with his creativity. Soon after arriving, he began to reveal hints of what would eventually become in full fruit an astonishing set of talents. He was a rock in a burlap sack who was now emerging as a Fabergé jeweled egg. Early in his stay, on a parent weekend, some parents were watching some kids playing frisbee from the terrace of the castle. Soon the disc landed in the pond. I turned to another, pointed out Alex, and said, "He'll be going in after it." Sure enough, with no discussion or hesitation, Alex waded in up to his armpits to fling it back to the group. He thought of himself as an artist, but soon discovered his talent for language, French, and began to acquire study skills for the first time in his 17 years. While no one would challenge his artistic ability or creativity, his other strengths became apparent to him for the first time. He became knowledgeable in 19th century Russian and English literature, French poetry, and philosophy. After only 3 years of instruction with no immersion, he could translate French language internet streams from Paris in real time. And it was often commented that he seemed to have no accent. As a high school senior, he earned an A- in a junior level class in Russian literature at Williams College. If you know of Williams, enough said. He became a remarkable writer, developing a talent that was only discernible before. His papers typically focused on deep nuance with titles that evoke real curiosity in the reader about what he might be offering. One was entitled "The Brothers Karamazov and the Number E," using the mathematics of nature to tease out more meaning from Dostoevsky. He once drew his language arts teacher, a Rhodes Scholar specialist in Russian literature, into a lengthy debate on levels of voice in Dostoevsky, and to her surprise, finally won her over. He elsewhere diagrammed this idea as a geometry proof on a napkin. This from someone who had refused to take math classes because he had trouble getting the right answer. I'm going to digress for a second. This speaks as much to the school as it does to him. It's a remarkable place. Yet, these are not evidence of his greatest accomplishments. Those arose in the course of building a personal center based on addressing and defeating deep self-doubt, taking responsibility for how he reacted to challenges imposed by his personal history and events beyond his control. He described the process as akin to tearing down a stone house and then reconstructing it in different alignment and configuration from exactly the same stones. He did this under dire threat of expulsion with virtually no guidance by Dewey's staff and little interaction with most students. Alex credited one student in particular, Johnny Smathers, with keeping him moving on his path to ultimate success. Their relationship became a seminal feature in the Dewey community, viewed by many others as the model friendship. This brotherhood proved to Alex that he could find belonging and true connectedness with others. This breakthrough demonstrated that he had overcome the issues that had brought him to Dewey and gave him a bearing on which to travel through the travails he would face later in life. The next 18 months were spent strengthening these acquired skills and teaching them to others. Among the lessons he learned and taught was that you can't change who you are. You can, however, change how you live as who you are. He developed an almost Socratic method of support for other students and their parents, which involved incisive, non-judgmental questions taken from his own experience, but often as apparent non sequiturs in the conversation of the moment. The founder of the school, in his prolonged absence, came to rely on him as his go-to eyes and ears in the community. He advised Alex, however, not to speak when unnecessary, to allow others to practice as his replacement once he left. In the last few weeks of his time, he led the community through several days of intensive recovery from traumatic events, of which he was probably the most primarily affected. An observer said that he helped each of nearly 30 students find their individual solution, often by means that were uncanny. Among other examples, he was accepted by Reed College as an exemplar of a new target type for their recruitment, someone who shared experiences too common among the traditional entrants, but had developed strength of character and a commitment to finding belonging in community without resorting to substance abuse. He was thought likely to emerge as a catalyst for change on the basis of his high abilities and his charisma. His application became a basis for reconsideration of their historical admission criteria, just as they were changing leadership to address this very issue. His advocate in that process wept when informed of his death. So where was he going? Well, he was becoming Wesley. Over time, he began using his given first name, initially when signing art, like his artist great-grandfather, but eventually on applications in his email address, basically everywhere he'd used Alex. I've talked with people who never knew him as Alex or Mac. Meeting you today, he would likely have introduced himself as Wesley. Wesley, I believe, was that new identity he aspired to adopt in Oregon. I suspect that he was acknowledging the fact that he was the third of 4 generations in his lineage to carry that name. He'd become very conscious and thoughtful about this lineage. It seems that he was attempting to adopt a Joycean perspective on life, explicitly, consciously connected with the generations before, yet aspiring to carry forward the strengths while leaving behind the demons of his forebears. I explained to him that I did not claim to be proud of him because that might imply that I deserve some credit for what he had achieved. I did tell him that I admired and respected him and that I loved him regardless of what he had done or would do. He did it himself, despite various and several impediments. In fact, as he overcame the obstacles we presented, he became that much stronger. He became so much better than I could have imagined. He certainly exceeded any standard I might have represented or stipulated. I was astonished and amazed. And while he'd spent 3 years honing a keen edge in the humanities, he intended to pursue neuroscience at Reed. He explained that he had concluded that memory formation was a particular interest. He was drawn there by recognizing that with the prodding of another Dewey student, that most memories are false as they change over time. We are our memories, yet our memories are false. He was looking for the dynamic underlying interpersonal relations in the self-image. I'm told that his next planned step was film school, possibly to utilize this knowledge in storytelling. When in 10th grade, I had suggested that he look into film production as an apt application of his specific talents. In the end, he was taking it full circle, adopting his mother's field as his own in pursuit of a suggestion from another life. My challenge now is not letting go of the past. I did that upon his arrival at Dewey. We agreed that past was past, perhaps prologue, and from now on we would focus on the future. Hence the rap lyrics. I asked that he never allow me to compromise his progress. Now my challenge is to abandon that future. I was looking forward initially to helping him with college. Once I began to understand what he'd become, I realized I had nothing to offer him except possibly to become a student so he could learn by teaching me. Maybe we could have, explored ideas, discussed his plans for his wonder-filled future in the relatively few years left for me. His future had become my raison d'etre, as he'd have said. He knew that and told me so in his last note. Nothing could have meant more to me from him. Upon examination of his journaled life and discussing him with friends and faculty, I found something I had not anticipated. Let me preface my finding with some definitions of a state of being. Mainly an affair of energy. One is not born so, one becomes so. It is no more than childhood recaptured at will. That's by Charles Baudelaire, his favorite poet. Able to reveal self-evident truth with no discernible path from common knowledge. Each of these is a definition of genius. As I said earlier, Dewey graduates leave better and different than in ability than when they arrive. I believe he became a genius while at Dewey. In scholarship, moral leadership, and in art, he came to shock us all with prescient insight and the ability to flip the script, as Johnny's put it, move us from obvious apparent meaning to deeper levels, often shifting our understanding of ourselves and our world. One Dewey graduate, upon hearing of his death, reached out to say that upon reflection, he realized that probably once a day over the last year he had found himself occasion to ask, what would Alex think? He was criticized when he arrived at Dewey for climbing trees, accused of seeking attention and isolation, perhaps. Or perhaps he was seeking perspective and solitude. Near the end, he revisited those old immobile friends, each presenting a different opportunity of engagement, making friends with each in its own way. No two trees climb the same. He said he intended to start a tree climbing club at Reed.